Gave mom an expensive gift for her birthday, but she threw it away, called me a failure, so I took back the gift and told her what was inside the box, and now she won't stop calling. I want to be part of your life again. I once gave my mom an expensive birthday gift, one she ended up tossing aside while calling me a failure. I retrieved it and revealed its contents, and ever since, she's been calling non-stop, begging to be a part of my life again. I was just 12 when my world flipped. That morning started out normally. Dad kissed me goodbye before heading off to work as a site manager at a construction firm, while mom barely glanced up from her phone. I couldn't help but notice how different they used to be with one another. My name is Melanie Carter, and that day was the last time I ever saw my dad alive. He collapsed at work from a massive heart attack that very afternoon. I was in class when the principal called me into her office. There, I found mom, her mascara impeccably intact despite the crushing news. "Your father's gone, Melanie," she said in a voice so calm it nearly didn't register. I broke down crying, but she just patted my back mechanically. That evening, I accidentally overheard her talking on the phone with her friend Linda. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but mom's voice seeped through the thin suburban walls. "Actually, Linda, this might be for the best," she murmured. "Being a widow carries more respect than being divorced, and I get to keep everything without the hassle of lawyers." She even laughed. I know. I'll play the grieving widow at the funeral. I've already picked out the perfect black dress." I sat on the stairs, hand pressed over my mouth to stifle a scream. Only Aunt Sarah, Dad's sister, saw right through her act. At the funeral, while everyone offered heartfelt condolences to my devastated mom, Aunt Sarah just stood by, shaking her head sadly. She had always known how mom really treated Dad. It wasn't long before mom moved on. Within 3 months, she started inviting a new man over for dinner. His name was Richard Thompson, and he came with 2 kids from his previous marriage, Brendan, 11, and Emma, 10. Mom whipped up elaborate meals for them, something she'd never bothered with for Dad. One evening, in an overly sweet tone, she said, "Melanie, honey, Richard and I have something to tell you." Sitting together on the couch, hand in hand and with mom beaming like a teenager, it was clear what was coming next. "We're getting married. Isn't it wonderful? You'll have a new father and siblings." I forced a smile, though my stomach churned. "That's great, Mom. Congratulations." Richard smiled at me, but his eyes were empty. "Brandon and Emma are so excited to have a new sister," he added, yet I noticed how his kids looked at me like I was just some stubborn stain on their expensive sneakers. That night, I called Aunt Sarah and we cried for hours. After listening patiently, she whispered, "Sometimes, sweetie, the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into." I clung to those words. The very next week after their honeymoon, Brandon and Emma moved in, immediately taking over the best rooms in the house, including my playroom, which Emma converted into her art studio. When I protested, Mom simply said, "Don't be selfish, Melanie, we need to make them feel welcome." After marrying Richard, Mom transformed completely. She'd spend hours helping Emma with homework or cheering Brandon on at soccer practice while I ate dinner alone in my room. The way she looked at Richard was as if he were the whole universe, something she'd never done with Dad. "Brandon needs new cleats," she'd announce, or "Emma's taking art classes this summer." There was always money for them. Meanwhile, I learned to stop asking for even basic things like new school supplies. Every time I did, I was met with eye rolls and comments implying I was being unreasonable. They started going on trips together, nothing fancy, just weekend getaways to nearby cities or camping trips in state parks, but I was never invited. "You'll be bored, Melanie," Mom would say without even looking at me as she packed snacks for Brandon and Emma. After all, someone had to feed the cat. So, I'd end up at Aunt Sarah's, whose small cottage eventually felt more like home than my own. She never had children of her own, yet she treated me as if I were the daughter she'd always wanted. "This isn't right, Melanie," she'd say while watching me unpack my overnight bag for what felt like the 100th time. "A mother shouldn't play favorites like this." I'd just shrug and think, "At least I have you, Aunt Sarah." When I turned 16, I finally brought up college during dinner. I'd been researching schools and dreaming about studying business management. "Mom," I said carefully, choosing a moment when everyone was in a good mood, "I've been thinking about college applications." Mom's fork clattered against her plate as she replied, "College, Melanie? We can't afford to send you to college, we need to focus on Brandon and Emma's education." Brandon smirked across the table, and Emma wore a satisfied grin, while Richard kept eating as if the conversation didn't concern him at all. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen. "What about Dad's money?" I asked, reminding her of his life insurance and years of savings. Her face hardened as she snapped, "I've spent that money taking care of you for the past 4 years, food, clothes, shelter. Did you really think any of that was free? Stop being so arrogant, Melanie." You can't just demand things from me. I stood there, stunned by her cold tone and blatant lie. Dad had worked hard to secure my future, and now it was all gone, spent on her new perfect family while I was left on the sidelines. The next weekend, still with tears burning in my eyes, I went to Aunt Sarah's house. Sitting at her kitchen table with the aroma of fresh coffee in the air, I told her everything about Mom's cruel dismissal of my college dreams. Aunt Sarah listened silently, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. Once I finished, she slipped away into her study. I heard drawers open and close, then she returned with a thick envelope. Your father came to see me about 2 weeks before he died, she said as she slid it across the table. It was odd, he seemed anxious, almost like he expected something terrible. He handed me this and made me promise to keep it safe until you were ready for college. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a bank statement for a substantial savings account in my name, with Aunt Sarah listed as trustee. Dad had been secretly saving money for years. Your mother was acting differently, Aunt Sarah added softly. He wanted your future to be secure, no matter what happened. The money had been gathering interest all these years. I burst into tears, but these were tears of gratitude and love for a father who had protected me even after he was gone. We can't tell Mom about this, I whispered, and she nodded in agreement. For the next 2 years, I threw myself into my studies while keeping my college plans hidden. Brandon and Emma never missed a chance to remind me of my destined future. Hey, Melanie, Brandon would sneer in the hallway, the diner downtown needs a dishwasher. You better get your application in early. Emma would chime in, maybe if you're lucky, they'll let you serve tables too. They laughed as if it were the best joke ever, but I simply walked on, my silence driving them crazy. Then came graduation day. Barely had I taken off my cap and gown when Mom and Richard called me into the living room for a serious talk. They sat on the couch like judges ready to pass sentence, while I stood there. Melanie, Richard began sternly, you're 18 now. We've been generous, but you need to understand that you can't live here forever, you need to find a job and start earning your own money. I smiled calmly, I understand completely. I'll be moved out by next week. Their surprised looks said it all, they'd expected tears or resistance. Mom started to speak, then fell silent. Well, good, Richard finally managed. That's very mature of you. Not once did they ask where I'd go or how I'd support myself, they were just relieved I agreed without fuss. Moving day arrived faster than I expected. I packed my life into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. It was astonishing how little I'd accumulated over the years, almost as if I'd been subconsciously preparing for this moment all along. Aunt Sarah pulled up in her blue Honda exactly at 9 a.m. I watched through my bedroom window as she parked, half expecting Mom or someone else to appear, but the house remained silent, though I did catch movement behind the curtains of Emma's room. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home shrink in the side mirror until it vanished completely. I didn't cry, instead, I felt lighter with every mile distancing me from that house built on carefully crafted pretenses. That summer, I worked at Sunshine Cafe, serving coffee and sandwiches to regulars who always tipped generously and treated me like family. Mrs. Peterson, the owner, even let me take on extra shifts so I could save up for college. Come September, I boarded a plane to start my new life at Marshall State University, 3 states away from everything I'd known. The business management program was tough, but I threw myself into it. My roommate, Jessica, became my first real friend since middle school. At first, she didn't know my whole story, but once she did, she hugged me tight and said, "They're lost, girl. They're lost." Mom's Facebook page became my window into the life I left behind. There they were, the perfect family, smiling at Brandon's soccer games, celebrating Emma's art show wins, and snapping vacation selfies at the beach. The captions always read like ads, so proud of our amazing kids. Nothing beats family time. I wasn't mentioned, not even once. It was as if I never existed. Holidays were spent at Aunt Sarah's, cooking together and watching old movies. We created our own traditions, ones that meant far more to me than any forced family dinner ever had. Sometimes, she'd catch me scrolling through Mom's social media and gently snatch my phone away. "Don't torture yourself," she'd say. "You're building your own story now." And I truly was. I eventually graduated summa cum laude with job offers lined up, all thanks to my internships and hard work. Mr. Reynolds, who ran a major marketing firm, first took notice of my work during a class project showcase. "We need sharp minds like yours," he told me during my interview, adding, "Your professors speak very highly of you." I began as a junior analyst, but I wasn't willing to settle. I stayed late, took on extra projects, and spent my free time tracking market trends. Within 5 years, I'd earned 2 promotions and saved enough for a down payment on my own apartment. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I stood in my empty living room, keys in hand, and finally let the tears flow, tears of joy, pride, and the satisfaction of making it on my own terms. Then, about 7 years into my time at the company, Mr. Reynolds called me into his office with a major surprise. "We're creating a new position," he said as he slid a folder across his desk. "Senior Director of Strategic Development. The board and I agree you're the perfect person for the job." I opened the folder and nearly gasped at the salary figure. It was more money than I'd ever imagined earning, especially at my age. I never felt the need to broadcast my life online. Sure, I had social media, but I mostly shared snapshots of sunsets or cozy coffee shops. Only Aunt Sarah knew about my promotions, my new apartment, or the sleek black Mercedes I treated myself to after landing the director role. "You've earned every bit of it," she would say proudly whenever I shared my achievements. Meanwhile, Brandon and Emma's social media feeds were endless highlight reels of mediocrity. Brandon would pose next to his used Hyundai Elantra, captioning his photos with cliches like living the dream and blessed luxury life, while Emma posted mall selfies tagged with designer brands she clearly couldn't afford. One post in particular made me laugh. Brandon standing beside his car at a local auto show with the caption, "When hard work pays off, success, entrepreneur." I was reading it from inside my Mercedes AMG, worth more than his entire annual salary, but I never felt the need to prove anything. Then, one Tuesday morning, a message changed everything. It popped up on my Facebook, "Melanie, it's your mother. My 55th birthday is coming up next month, and I'm throwing a celebration at an upscale restaurant called LeBlanc. You've probably never heard of it. I expect you to attend on the 15th at 7 p.m. sharp. Don't embarrass me." I stared at the screen, reading it over and over. After 12 years of silence, this was her way of reaching out. No "how are you," no attempt to bridge the gap, just a command to show up at her party with a thinly veiled jab at the restaurant's expense. I nearly deleted the message, but something, curiosity, or maybe a desire to see what would happen, made me pause. I called Mr. Reynolds to request a week off, then booked a flight back to my hometown that very evening. Later, over tea in Aunt Sarah's cozy kitchen, she asked the question I'd been mulling over, "What are you planning to give her?" I smiled and pulled up the confirmation email on my phone. It was for a luxury vacation package to the Maldives, a 2-week stay at a 5-star resort with first-class flights included, worth about $15,000. Aunt Sarah's eyes widened. "Melanie, that's too much. She doesn't deserve it." I laughed. "Oh, I know she doesn't. But can you imagine her face when she realizes what she's been missing all these years? The daughter she cast aside ended up more successful than she ever imagined. I can't wait to see her reaction when she finally understands just how wrong she was about me." Aunt Sarah chuckled. "You're a little bit evil," she said, shaking her head. "I love it." On the evening of Mom's birthday, I slipped into my Chanel dress, elegant in its simplicity, with a price tag that could buy 10 of those gaudy outfits I later saw. I deliberately hailed a taxi to the restaurant, amused at how it would reinforce their assumptions about my life. LeBlanc turned out exactly as I expected, the sort of place that impresses those who've never dined at a truly high-end establishment, the kind that serves frozen seafood with gold leaf desserts. I'd had business dinners at places that made this look like a casual diner. The hostess led me to a private room where the party was in full swing. Mom sat at the head of the table in a sequin dress that sparkled under the chandelier. Richard was beside her, with Brandon and Emma flanking them like royal attendants. The remaining seats were filled with relatives I hadn't seen in over a decade, Aunt Linda, who used to pinch my cheeks too hard, Cousin Rachel, always bragging about her kids, and other faces from my past. Mom barely glanced at me before curling her lip and saying, "Oh, Melanie, you came. You could have dressed up a bit more for the occasion." I took my seat at the far end of the table and watched the scene unfold. Aunt Linda proudly presented Mom with a scented candle set from a trendy mall boutique, which Mom cooed over as if it were priceless. Then Cousin Rachel handed over a gift card for a local spa day, prompting excited squeals from Mom. The gifts kept coming, a cookbook, a decorative vase, a basket of bath products, each treated by Mom as if it were a treasure, with every item praised as thoughtful and perfect. Next, it was Brandon and Emma's moment. They stood up together, grinning as if they'd just struck gold. "Mom," Brandon announced, though it still felt off hearing him use that term. Emma and I had pooled our money to get her something special. Emma then showed a photo on her phone, a 65-inch smart TV, already delivered and mounted in the living room. Mom burst into tears and enveloped them in a tight hug. "My wonderful, generous children. I can't believe you did this, you must have saved for months." Finally, all eyes turned to me. I reached into my purse and produced a small, elegantly wrapped box. Mom's expression darkened immediately. "What's this supposed to be?" "Open it and see," I suggested softly, but she refused. Her face flushed with anger. This is exactly what I expected from you, she spat. You show up here in that plain dress, probably the only decent thing you own. You take a taxi because you can't afford a car, and now you give me this tiny box? What could possibly be in it that's worth more than a McDonald's gift card? She tossed the box back at me, and it skidded across the table, scratching the cheap veneer. Brandon and Emma snickered behind their hands, some guests looked uncomfortable while others seemed to relish the drama. Richard just kept eating his dessert, as if nothing were wrong. I calmly picked up the box, brushing off the crumbs clinging to its elegant wrapping. The room fell silent as everyone waited to see what I'd do next. You know what's funny, Mom? I said steadily. Inside this little box is a receipt for a 2-week luxury vacation to the Maldives, first-class flights, a 5-star resort, everything included, worth $115,000. The color drained from her face, and Emma dropped her fork with a clatter. That's impossible, Mom, she stammered. You couldn't possibly afford something like that, you're obviously lying. I couldn't help but laugh. You'd know whether I could afford it if you'd ever taken an interest in my life these past 12 years. Let me catch you up. I'm now senior director at Reynolds Marketing Group, I own an apartment in the city, and that taxi you mocked? I took it because I didn't want to leave my Mercedes parked in this neighborhood. Brandon's mouth dropped open and Emma fell silent. Since you're so convinced I'm a failure, I continued, tucking the box back into my purse, and clearly you want nothing from me, I won't spoil your birthday any further. Enjoy your TV, I hear its resolution is almost as good as the one in my home theater. With my head held high, I left the party, the click of my heels echoing in the sudden quiet. I hailed a taxi and drove straight to Aunt Sarah's house, where she was waiting with 2 steaming cups of tea on the coffee table. I recounted everything that had happened. Some people never change, she sighed, shaking her head. Your mother has always cared more about appearances than reality. We were still talking when my phone rang from an unknown number. I recognized the voice immediately. Melanie, sweetheart, it's Mom, came a saccharine message. I don't know where you got my number, but I've been thinking about what happened. Have you? I replied coolly, yes, and I realize now that I may have been hasty. If you're still willing to give me that gift, I'd love to accept it. We could use this as a fresh start. I want to be part of your life again. We're family, after all. No, I said firmly. We're not family, we're just people who share DNA. You don't really want to rebuild our relationship, you just want that vacation package. I hung up, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. After I left town, Mom called from different numbers, her cell, the home phone, even Richard's. When she realized I wasn't answering, messages flooded in, Melanie, please call me back. We need to talk. I've been thinking about your job, maybe you could help Brandon kickstart a career in marketing, he's so creative. And Emma says she'd love to intern at a big company like yours, it would look great on her college apps. Also, the house needs repairs, and since you're doing so well, each message was more blatant than the last, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the past, just an endless stream of requests and hints about my money. It was like watching a desperate gambler trying to win back his losses, except what Mom had lost wasn't money, it was her relationship with her daughter. I read each message with a detached curiosity, as if reviewing a case study. The tactics were almost impressive in their variety. Guilt, I'm your mother, how can you ignore me? Flattery, you've become such a successful woman. Manipulation, family should help family, and even threats, I'll tell everyone how you abandoned your mother. Your mother's been calling me non-stop, Aunt Sarah later told me on the phone, a week after I returned home. She even showed up at my house today, demanding your address. What did you say? I asked, though I already knew. I told her to get off my property before I called the police, I replied. Aunt Sarah chuckled. You should have seen her face. She kept insisting she had a right to know where her daughter lives, but I reminded her that she gave up that right years ago. I could picture Mom standing on Aunt Sarah's porch in one of her expensive outfits, trying to bully her way into getting what she wanted. It was the same pattern I'd seen all my life, and now I saw it clearly for what it was. She didn't take it well. Aunt Sarah went on, ranting about how ungrateful we both were, how she'd sacrificed everything for Mom, and that the neighbors probably heard it all. When she realized I wasn't going to give in, she stormed off to her car. But Melanie, be careful, I assured Aunt Sarah. I've already blocked her on everything, social media, phone, email, and even my office security knows not to let her in if she shows up. After we hung up, I wandered through my apartment, admiring the modern furniture I'd chosen, the art on the walls, and the stunning view of the city from my windows, all earned through my own hard work. I thought about Mom's sudden interest now that she knew I had money. In the end, it was almost laughable. She discarded a real relationship with her daughter to maintain the facade of a perfect family, and now she was desperate to reinsert herself into my life for the sake of appearances. But through it all, she taught me one valuable lesson: family isn't about legal documents, it's about love, support, and being there for each other through thick and thin. I had that with Aunt Sarah. The next morning, I called the travel agency and changed the name on the Maldives vacation package to Sarah Carter. When I told Aunt Sarah, she tried to protest, but I insisted, "You deserve this more than she ever did. You've been more of a mother to me than she ever was." Aunt Sarah hugged me tightly, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.